Thank you, Mr. Primakov. And on behalf of the Special Envoy, the UN Special Envoy for Syria, Geir Pedersen, let me extend a big thank you to our host, Defense Minister Shoigu and Deputy Minister Fomin, and a personal nod to Major General Ilin, with whom I had the pleasure of working in the UN-Iran Operations Center in Geneva on the cessation of hostilities in 2016. Now, it's also a pleasure, of course, to follow my Iraqi colleague. Iraq holds a very dear place in my heart from my days with the UN in Baghdad and Mosul, but of course I'm here to talk about Syria, on which I worked for the last 5 years. I have to say, listening to my previous colleagues and speakers, I was reminded of a saying by former senior advisor on humanitarian affairs, Jan Egeland, who used to remind us every so often that humanitarian problems need political solutions, not humanitarian solutions. And it's also a bit opportune that today we meet on a day that the Secretary General observed the first International Day for Multilateralism and Diplomacy for Peace, and therefore that's a good segue to the mediation effort. Now, when Geir Pedersen, as the fourth Special Envoy on Syria, briefed the Security Council for the first time on 20th of February, he acknowledged, of course, that 8 years into the conflict, he came into new realities. But he also said in the same breath that while the military aspects of the conflict may be winding down, the conflict is far from over. And as you've just heard in this panel, and of course earlier as well today, the challenges in Syria continue to be formidable. It is true that people remain in some of their divisive logic, but of course that may be also natural 8 years into a horrific conflict, which is the reason why Geir Pedersen decided his first order of business was to try to remedy the situation by first trying to bridge the gap of trust and rekindle a political process that needed to be buttressed by efforts at de-escalation, hopefully towards, at some point, an eventual nationwide ceasefire, and for tangible improvements on Syrian lives. To that effect, he outlined 5 goals, and they're the following. First and primary goal was to begin and deepen a sustained dialogue with the Syrian parties, with the Syrian government in Damascus and with the Syrian opposition in Riyadh. And he has already paid 3 visits to Damascus and will return soon, and also has visited the opposition in Riyadh and welcomed them in Geneva. In those kind of consultations, no issue is off limits. Second goal, and very important for him, is the issue of detainees, abductees, and missing persons. And you've just heard Mr. Carbonnier outline the pretty grim situation on this file. It's the UN's deep belief that meaningful and concrete action on this file will go a long way in building confidence for Syrians who want to return to their country. As we also just heard, there's hardly any Syrian family that's not affected by this issue. Third goal, and also very important, is to engage and involve a wider range of Syrians in the political process. The Special Envoy continues to regularly interact with the Syrian Women's Advisory Boards and with the civil society organizations that we've built a relationship with over the years. He has also had the chance to visit IDPs in Homs and a refugee camp in Lebanon. So he has heard firsthand all the issues that affect all Syrians, including the issue of return. And my UNHCR colleague, Mr. Amin Awad, outlined to you the challenges we still hear from Syrians themselves about the voluntary safe return to Syria. Goal number 4, and again, you heard whoever was in the session earlier this morning with Deputy Foreign Minister Vershinin, is the goal of finalizing the Constitutional Committee, a credible and balanced Constitutional Committee. And as you heard, we're still in discussions about finalizing the composition and the understandings of the rules of procedures that are to guide the work of this committee. That said, Ms. Pedersen has been very clear that the Constitutional Committee is just a door opener to a broader political process that has to address all the issues and elements that are within the Resolution 2254 that was adopted nearly 4 years ago now, and enjoys still the commitment of the international community despite their differences elsewhere. Last goal, but not least, he really focuses on how to help international actors deepen their own dialogue towards a common, credible, and sustainable political settlement that enjoys international legitimacy. The situation in, as we also heard earlier, in Al-Hol, in Rukban, in Idlib, the uncertainty in the northeast, the fear of regional escalation only makes this issue of continuous cooperation all that more important. So in all his engagements with Syrian international parties, the Special Envoy has outlined the basis of his mandate, and that's Resolution 2254, which includes all the elements required for a final political settlement on the Syrian conflict. It begins by respecting the sovereignty, territorial integrity, unity, and independence of Syria. It recognizes the suffering of the Syrian people and lays out a roadmap for a truly Syrian-led process. It demands respect for international law, underscores and stresses the issue of protection of civilians and unfettered humanitarian access, and you've heard, again, the issues outlined very specifically before. It tackles the issue of cessation of hostilities, the necessity to tackle terrorism, to address confidence-building measures. These are all vital issues for if Syrians are to move away from conflict. And it also, very importantly, addresses issues of governance, constitutional issues, and UN-supervised elections. These are the means by which the Syrians themselves, and only the Syrians, can define their vision of their own country and their own future. And of course, it addresses issues of reconstruction and refugees, which are enormous in scale, but require a broader political understanding and agreement, because these are not simply technical issues. Therefore, in short, this Resolution 2054 provides all the elements, the comprehensive elements for a political solution that will bring, hopefully, stability, not just in Syria, but Syria and beyond its borders, and a genuine peace. And we often reminded, as the Secretary General in the very grim anniversary of the conflict last month told us, it is actually a more imperative and obligation of the international community to help the Syrians unite around a common vision that addresses the root causes of the conflict and move towards a negotiated solution. And that's my last point. The very important element of 2254 is that it stresses there is no military solution. The solution has to be a negotiated one among the Syrians and facilitated by the UN and hopefully buttressed by international understanding. Thank you very much.